everyone, this is Sahiti from Edureka and welcome to today's session on Spring Boot tutorial. So thank you all the attendees for joining in today's session. Before we start, all of you just give me a quick confirmation on the chat window whether I'm audible or not. Okay, I've got a yes from Abhinav, Mona, Karthik, Alekhya, and I've got a few more yeses too. So that's great. So now let's get started. First, let's look into all the topics that we're going to cover in today's session. We will start by understanding what Spring Boot is and then understand the need of Spring Boot. After that, we will get into the differences between Spring and Spring Boot and lastly learn how does Spring Boot work. So guys, I hope that you're clear with today's agenda. Okay, I've got many yeses, so now let's get started. So what is the Spring Boot? Well, Spring Boot is a Spring framework. It makes it easy to create Spring-powered production-grade applications. It not only creates an opinionated view of the Spring platform, but is also used to create standalone Java applications. Now, before deep diving into how does Spring Boot work, let me tell you what Spring Boot is not. Well, Spring Boot is not an app or a web server. It does not implement any specific framework, and it also does not generate any code. So now that I've clarified the confusion between what Spring Boot is and what Spring Boot is not, it's good time I should tell you the need of Spring Boot. Well, it provides faster and widely accessible getting started experience for all the Spring development. It finds quick ways to diverge from the defaults. So basically, it is opinionated to be out of the box, but it gets out of the way quickly as requirements start to diverge. It provides a range of non-functional features that are common to large classes of projects such as embedded servers, security metrics, health checks, etc. And the best part about Spring Boot is that it does not generate any code. So by now, you've got a basic understanding of what Spring Boot is. So now, let me clarify the confusion between Spring and Spring Boot. Well, Spring is a dependency injection framework and Spring Boot is a suite of pre-configured set of frameworks or technologies. So basically, consider yourself as if you're baking a cake. Spring is like the ingredients that are required to make the cake and Spring Boot is the complete cake in your hand. Coming to the second point, Spring manages the lifecycle of Java classes and in Spring Boot, you need not worry about configuring a data source. Finally, if you have to run a Spring application, Spring takes a lot of time to have an application up and running and Spring Boot is the shortest way to run a Spring application. So guys, I hope that you're clear what Spring Boot is. Now, let's get into how does Spring Boot work with a simple demo. Well, in this demo, we will be using a simple Spring Boot project to develop Spring-based applications. So I feel it's really important that all of you understand how does it work in the background. Before getting into Spring Boot, I'm assuming that all of you have good knowledge of Java as that would be of great help. Okay, I've got many yeses, so that's great. So now let's continue. Just in case if you do not have Java installed on your system, to learn how to download and install Java 8, that is the Java Development Kit and not JRE, and also know how to set up Eclipse IDE, that is what we're going to use in this demo, you can check out my previous video on installing Spring Boot setups. As I mentioned before, in this video I would be using Java 8 and it is recommended that you at least have a Maven version of 3.0. So now, what are we going to learn with this demo? We will start by understanding how to set up and launch Spring Boot applications with Maven and Eclipse. Then, we will create a simple REST controller and understand more about Spring Boot Starter Web and Spring Boot Starter Parent. So is it clear, guys? Okay, that's great. So now let's get started with our hands-on. So now, to launch your Eclipse application, you have to go to the directory of your Eclipse folder. So let's go to Start, this PC. Go to C, go to Eclipse, and launch the application. So, when you launch your Eclipse application, you see that Eclipse asks for the directory of your workspace. So, what is this workspace? Well, workspace is basically a folder wherein all the files belonging to your projects are stored. So, let me show you with an example. So, let me just go to this directory. So you can see that there are various projects that I've already created on my Eclipse IDE. So now let me just open this Hello World example. You can see that it has all the files and folders regarding this project such as main.java class, pom file, etc. So guys, is it clear what workspace is? Okay, so let's continue now. Once you choose the directory for your workspace, click on Launch button. So this launches your Eclipse application. While it's launching, let me tell you that you have to make sure that you have downloaded Java EE Eclipse IDE. So once you launch your Eclipse application, a window like this opens up. So to set up a Maven project with Eclipse, you have to go to File, you have to go to New, and choose Maven Project. In the window that opens up, you have to choose to create a simple project, as we want to create a very simple project to get the understanding of Spring Boot. Also, you can choose the default location for your workspace to store all the files. After that, click Next. In the next window that opens up, you have to choose the group ID, artifact ID, description for your project. So over here, let me just tell you that the group ID plus the artifact ID is equal to your project name. So any Maven artifact that you create needs to have a group ID and an artifact ID. It's basically similar how would you give a package name and a class name to every class you create, isn't it? So let's just say I put the group ID as com.edureka.example and the artifact ID as Spring Boot Demo. Let the version be 0.0.1 snapshot and a packaging be jar. In the description, I can put as demo and then click on finish. So basically, this would create your first Maven project that you can see in your Project Explorer. So now, let me take you through the project structure of this project. So when you open this project, you can see the folders such as source main Java, source main resources, etc. Well, all the folders are empty for now. Let me just show you. At the bottom, you can see a pom.xml file. This file is basically the configuration for your Maven project, housing all the dependencies required for your project. So now, coming to the folders, let me brief you a little bit about every folder. Coming to the source main Java folder, this folder consists of the source code of your project. The source test Java folder consists of the unit test or the integration test. Now, if you open the pom.xml file, let me just open this for you. You would see that it has the group ID, artifact ID, version, and the description that we just entered. Okay, so Abhinav has a question here on why do we exactly need Maven? Well, Abhinav, let me tell you that the Java web applications use jar files that are the dependencies. For example, let me just say that we are trying to create a Spring project, we need a Spring jar. So before Maven came into picture, we had to download this jar manually and then put it in our project workspace. But after Maven came over, it benefited us by introducing the dependency management. So let me just show you how that happens. So suppose I want to include a Spring Code jar for this project. What I have to do is, I have to find out the required dependency for Spring Core. So in the Google, you have to type Maven Dependency Spring Framework. Open the first link which says Spring Core. After the link opens up, you have to choose the release version. Let's say I choose the release version 4.3.14. So I'll click on that. So once it opens, I just have to copy the dependency section and include this in the POM file of the project. But before you include the dependencies, you have to create the dependency section and then include these dependencies. So let me just go to the POM file, create the dependency section, and then include these dependencies. So well, I haven't saved this file at present. You can observe that there is no folder as Maven dependencies. But as I save this file, so let me just save this, you can see a folder named Maven dependencies showing Spring Core and logging files. So as these dependencies, the Spring Core and the logging dependencies, which is the transitive dependency for Spring Core, are needed to create a Spring project, we need Maven in our projects. So Abhinav, I hope that I've cleared your doubt. Okay, so now coming back to the session to create a Spring Boot application and launching it with embedded Tomcat, to launch the Spring Boot application, we have 5 steps. Let me just show you. Well, we have to first add the Spring Boot Starter parent, and then we will add the Spring Boot Starter web and then configure the Java version 8. After this is done, we will add the Spring Boot plugin and finally create a Spring Boot application launcher. So well, these are the 5 steps to launch a Spring Boot application. Well, we will start by adding a Spring Boot Starter parent as it manages the dependency versions for everything. So once we include the Spring Boot Starter parent, we need not specify any version. Now, After that, we will include the Spring Boot Starter web. But why do we need this? Well, one of the main reasons is that if you have to develop a web application, then there are a lot of jar files that would be needed. So suppose if you use Spring MVC instead of Spring Boot, then you have to include all the dependencies manually, and this is really tiresome. So that's the reason we will include Spring Boot Starter web. After that, we will configure Java version 8 and add a Spring Boot Starter plugin to launch the Spring Boot application. Finally, after all the steps are done, we will create a Java file which is called the application launcher. So are the steps clear to everybody? Okay, that's great. So now let's get started by configuring Spring Boot Starter Parent. So to configure Spring Boot Starter Parent, you have to type Spring Boot Starter Parent. So you have to click on the first link that opens up and then choose the release version again. So let's just say I choose the release version 2.0.0. So I'll click on it. So once I choose the release version as 2.0.0, to include the group ID, artifact ID and the version of Spring Boot Starter Parent, you have to first create the parent section in the POM file of your project. So for that, let me just go back to the POM file and let's first delete this dependency section as that is not needed at present, and then create the parent section. And over here, let's just go back, copy the group ID, artifact ID and the version and paste it here. Once it is done, just save the file and thus your Spring Boot Starter Parent is added. Okay, so Mona has a question for us on what does exactly Spring Boot Parent provide. Well, Mona, let me just tell you that it provides default plugins, it provides various versions of releases and so on. So once you include the Spring Boot Parent, you need not include the version number again and again for every plugin that you include for your project. So Mona, I hope that I've clarified the question for you. Okay, so coming back, just right click on this project, go to Maven and choose Update Project. And in the window that opens up, you can choose all the projects that you want to update the Maven. So at present, we're working on one project, so I'll just go for that and click on OK. Okay, so that's how you can include your Spring Boot Starter Parent. So now let's go to the second step, that is by updating the Spring Boot Starter Web. Let me first tell you about what Spring Boot Starter Web is. Well, Spring Boot Starter Web is like a parent for developing any Java applications. It kinds of brings in the core stuff, logging stuff, binding stuff, and other things that you need to develop a typical web application with Java. So similarly, to configure a Spring Boot Starter Web, you have to type on Google Spring Boot Starter Web and then choose the first link that opens up. Over here, you have to choose the release version. I'm going for 2.0.0 as I've chosen the same version for the parent. So over here, you just have to include the group ID, artifact ID in the POM file of your project. So let's just copy that and open the POM file of the project. So before you include the group ID and the artifact ID for Spring Boot Starter Web, you have to create a dependency section. So for that, let me just create the dependency section, under which let me again create an individual dependency section and then paste the group ID and the artifact ID. Okay, so now let's just save this file. Once you save this file, you can see in the Maven folder that all the jars are downloaded by itself. So isn't it simple rather than downloading jar file manually for each dependency needed? Now, a question may come onto your mind on why we haven't included the version for Starter Web. Well, the answer to this question is that the Spring Boot Starter Parent provides the version we want to use. So for this project, all the Spring Boot Starter would use a version of 2.0.0. So what's exactly happening here? Basically, what's happening here is that once we configure the Spring Boot Starter Parent and configure the dependencies for the parent, all the Spring Boot dependencies use the same version as the parent. So when you look into the Maven dependencies folder, you can see stuff like logging, embedded Tomcat, auto-configured jar, etc. Now, coming to the third step where we have to configure Java version 8, you just have to add the properties section and include Java version of 1.8. So let me just do that. Let's create a properties section and then include Java version 1.8. Once this is done, save the file. So what have we done till now? We have configured Spring Boot Starter Parent, we have configured Spring Boot Starter Web, we have also configured Java version 8. Now, to choose the plugin to run the application that we are creating, you have to build the plugin. So on your browser, type Spring Boot Maven plugin. Open the first link that comes up and then copy the build section. So now you have to include this in the POM file of your project. So let's just include this build section and then remove the version, execution and the goals section as these are not required at present. So just save this file. So now your POM file is ready. Now coming to the last step, to build an application. To build an application, what you have to do is you have to go to the source main Java folder, right click on this folder, go to new and choose class. In the window that opens up, you have to choose the name of your class, let's say application. And then let's just say we want to include the method stubs as public static void main, and then click on finish. Once this is done, you can see a class named application created. Before moving forward into building an application, let me just show you a short way of creating a Spring Boot project. So for that, we're going to use a simple Spring Boot Starter plugin, that is the Spring Tool Suite. So you have to install the Spring Starter plugin from the Eclipse Marketplace. So for that, go to Help, go to Eclipse Marketplace, type here Spring Tool Suite, and then search for it. Well, this is already installed on my system, else you have to click on this Install Radio button. To create a simple project, you have to go to File, go to New, and choose Spring Starter Project. In the window that opens up, you have to similarly choose the group ID, artifact ID, the name for your project, and the description as we did before, and then click on Finish. So let's just say I put the name as Demo Project. And then I choose the following for the group ID, artifact ID, and then click on Next. Once I click on Next, you can see that the version number is 2.0.1, and you can choose the dependencies you want to include for your project. So let's just say if I want to include web, so I just have to type web and then I can choose it. And if I have to include dev tools, I just have to click on it and then choose finish. Once you click on finish, this will create your new project. So let me just show that. And you can see on the left side in your project explorer that your project has been created. So well, that's how you can create a simple project using your Spring Boot Starter plugin. Coming back to the application that we were building on, let's continue to build this application. So you can see in the class named application, you have to import some annotations to make it a Spring Boot application. So for that, you have to type @Spring Boot application. So to resolve this error, just click on it and you just have to import this annotation. So click on it and this imports your annotation. Once this is done, you want to create a simple application. So to create an application, what you have to do is you have to type application context space ctx is equal to, ctx is basically any variable name that you can take, and then type spring application dot run, and in the brackets include the class name. So here it's applications, so type application dot class comma arguments, and at the end put a semicolon. So now you can see an error at application context. That's because we haven't imported the required file. So for that, just import this. Just click on this and import. So well, that resolves your error. So now just save this file. So basically, all this class does is that it just launches your Spring application. What we have here is a simple Java class with a main method. Now, observe this annotation Spring Boot application. What does it do? Well, this launches the Spring Boot application. So it launches up the application context we pass in the name of the class to the Spring application.run. Is it clear? Okay. So if you have to run this file, you have to right click on this project, go to Run As, and choose Java Application. Choose Application Spring Boot Demo, that is the main class, and then click on OK. Once you launch up this Java application, you can see in the console the Spring banner, and at the end of the console, you can see that the application has started on port number 8080. So guys, that's how you can run your Spring applications. So now, if you have observed in this project, we have not created any controller here. So basically, we have a server running, but there's nothing running on it. So let me just show you. Let me just open this browser and type localhost :8080. Well, you can see that there's nothing running on this port. So to avoid this error, we need to create a controller. So now let me teach you how to add a REST controller. So for that, let me just go back to the project, right click on this package, go to new and choose a class. Over here, let me name the class as welcome controller and then click on finish. So basically, what I'm trying to do is that when I type on localhost a specific port number, let's say 8080, I want a message returned, let's say welcome to this session. Right now, if I use this URL, you can see the error that I just showed you. To remove this error, I will create a controller class which would handle this /welcome URL. So to create a controller, you need to use the annotation @REST controller, and then we will create a method inside it. So let me just stop this running application at present. Let's clear the console. So over here, let me just import this annotation @REST controller. And you can see an error. So for that, you have to just go to this and then import this required annotation. So over here, let's just create a simple method. Let's say public string welcome. In this method, let's return a message. Let's say welcome to this session. Now, how do we map this /welcome URL to this method? So for that, you have to use this annotation @request mapping. So let me just import this annotation @request mapping, and in brackets, let's include what we want to pass as request. Let's say I just want to pass the request as /welcome. So well, you can see an error. So to resolve this error, you have to again import the required annotation. So now let's just relaunch this application by right clicking on this file and then go to run and choose Java application. On the console, you can see that the /welcome URL is mapped to the application, and application has started on port number 8080. So let's go to the port number 8080 again and pass the request as /welcome. Well, this returns a message saying welcome to this session, indicating that your controller file is working. Now, just in case, if you want this welcome message to come from a welcome service, you have to create the welcome service class, which will be responsible for getting the welcome method. So let's go back to the project, create the class welcome service, inside which let me just create a method. So let me just type public string welcome retrieve, let me just say, and let's just say I want to return a message, hey everyone. Once this is done, you just have to save this file. Now, if you have to include this welcome service, you have to type private welcome service is equal to new welcome service. Also, you have to change the return to service dot welcome retrieve. Once this is done, just save this file. Now, have you understood what's happening here? Let me just explain it to you guys. Well, this particular service is being called and the message in that would be returned. So to check that, let's right click on this project, go to run and choose Java application and then run this project again. Okay, so at the end of the console, the application has started. So let's go to the browser, let's refresh this. You can see that the message has been returned from the service. So basically, welcome controller depends on the welcome service to return the message. This welcome controller right now is creating a dependency. So basically, it is handling everything by itself. Now that it's handling everything by itself, it will create a tough problem to replace it with anything else. So that's where the frameworks like Spring come in. With Spring, what you can do is that Spring can manage the specific bean and create an instance by itself. So once the welcome service is created, we would just want to inject it. Then we can create multiple implementations on welcome service based on whatever implementation welcome controller would work with. Over here, a question may come to all your minds on how do we tell Spring that it is the component which it has to manage by itself. So to help Spring to identify which components it has to manage by itself, you have to use the @component annotation. So with the @component annotation, Spring knows how to manage the bean. So whenever you start this application, Spring would automatically create an instance of this bean and be ready with it. So let me just include that in the project. So suppose we want to help Spring to identify the welcome service as a component that it has to manage by itself. You can add the @component annotation here. And let's just say we update this return message so that we know the change, and let's just say, good morning guys. Now to resolve this error, just click on this and import the annotation required. Once this is done, just save this file. Now, how do we tell the welcome controller to use this instance created? Well, this can be done by something known as auto-wiring. So auto-wiring is the process where Spring creates the beans and injects them wherever they are needed. To perform this process auto-wiring, you have to use the annotation @auto-wired. So let me just add this annotation @auto-wired. And then over here, change this to private welcome service. Then save this file. So now Spring would take care of creating this welcome service and auto-wire it to the welcome service here. So now let's just restart this application. And now let's just go to the browser and refresh this. So well, you can see a message saying good morning guys. That means a component has been identified. A question may come to your mind. What if Spring does not find the component it's looking for? So let me just close this before I move forward, and let's just say I remove this annotation @component. And now let me just restart this application. Well, you can see that the application has failed to start, and you can also see that the welcome controller file is not able to find the required bean. So guys, that's how Spring raises an error when it does not find the component it's looking for. So now let me just close this console and let me just add back this component annotation here, and then just save this file and then run again. So at the end of the console, you can see that the application has started. So let's go back to the browser and let's just refresh this. And well, it shows the message, good morning guys. That means our application is running fine. So guys, that's how you can create and launch your first Spring Boot project. Now, coming to the other Spring Boot startup projects, let me just tell you that Spring Boot Starter web services are used to develop web services and web applications. You can use web services to build web applications using SOAP. Coming to Spring Boot Starter test, you'll be able to write unit tests and things like JUnit. Using Spring Boot Starter JDBC, this would bring basic JDBC and Spring Boot JDBC. Spring Boot Starter Security would bring into Spring Security and auto configuration. Spring Boot Starter Data JPA provides some interface to query data from JPA stuff. Lastly, Spring Boot Starter Data REST kinds of makes it very easy to expose REST services. So you just have to create basic entity beans. So guys, that's all for today's session. Thank you and have a great day.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!